Inflation is dead. It's dead. We have no inflation. Think of it. Our stock market hit record highs.
President Trump claims that inflation is dead. New data out today tells a different story. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that consumer prices rose 0.7% last month, pushing the annual inflation rate to its highest point.
America is facing a fracture it never imagined. The bond that tied the U.S. and Canada for 70 years is unraveling, not with an explosion, but with a quiet, merciless tear. Tariffs, the weapon President Trump used to ignite a trade war, have turned back against the nation, striking American families and businesses. While Washington fixated on China and Europe, Canada quietly signed trade deals with 11 nations: Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, South Korea, Japan, Vietnam, India, Brazil, Norway, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom. A series of handshakes in Ottawa, while the United States was left outside the room. This is not diplomacy. This is economic warfare disguised as cooperation. The question now is not whether America will lose, but how much and how fast. The impact cuts across industries like falling dominoes. It begins with retail, where one American giant built 47 distribution centers and employed 18,000 workers solely to serve Canadian consumers. That lifeline, worth $847 million annually, is evaporating as Korean electronics, Japanese appliances, and Australian food products flow directly into Canada. Early projections warn of a 23% revenue drop and layoffs across northern operations, with stock prices already down 8%.
I must say, I learned that 90% of handbags that are sold in the US are made in foreign countries. And so it's been really difficult dealing with the tariffs.
From retail, the collapse spread into automotive. Detroit's legacy of integrated production, Michigan components assembled in Ontario before returning as finished systems, is unraveling. Japanese and Korean suppliers now enjoy a 15% tariff advantage, replacing American parts and courting Canadian factories with joint ventures. What once symbolized North American strength now risks becoming a liability, as analysts whisper of a great reshuffling of the entire auto supply chain. Then comes agriculture, the beating heart of rural America. For decades, $2.3 billion worth of grain, soybeans, and processed foods cross the northern border each year. But Australian wheat enters Canada 12% cheaper, Brazilian soybeans arrive with faster clearance, and the river of American exports is slowing to a trickle. Farmers in North Dakota, Minnesota, and Montana, where Canadian sales once represented half their livelihood, are watching silos overflow and prices collapse, prompting warnings of a new dust bowl born not of drought but of diplomacy.
That Trump's tariffs would drive prices higher and higher. U.S. inflation accelerated in the month of June, according to the latest report, with the Consumer Price Index rising 2.7% from a year earlier.
The damage deepens in energy. One U.S. corporation once earned $3.4 billion annually moving Canadian crude and natural gas south. Now Canada turns to Norway, the UK, and Australia, partners promising not dependency but shared processing on Canadian soil and access to Asian markets. Oil that once powered American refineries is diverted overseas. Refinery utilization tumbles to 67%, stock values drop 15%, and analysts label it North American energy fragmentation. Even the invisible arteries of technology are being severed. 12 American data centers once processed millions of Canadian transactions every day. But new trans-Pacific cables, Swiss financial safeguards, Singaporean servers, and British AI collaborations are building direct routes that bypass the U.S. entirely. What was once a geographic advantage is dissolving in a world where data travels at light speed, leaving American firms facing the decoupling of North American digital infrastructure.
And finally, the dominoes strike manufacturing and finance. U.S. factories that relied on Canadian inputs now watch Japan and Germany lure assembly lines north of the border. American banks, once indispensable intermediaries, are losing $4.1 billion in Canadian business to Swiss, Singaporean, and London-based competitors. Shares tumble 12%, while analysts describe the process as nothing less than the balkanization of North American finance. The numbers are merciless: $11.2 billion in direct losses for these 7 giants, translating into $26.9 billion in economic damage once ripple effects spread. From Buffalo to Detroit, from Fargo to Bellingham, entire towns built on Canadian trade now face extinction.
This is not just about statistics. It is about workers leaving shuttered plants, families watching their communities dissolve, and a nation that no longer commands loyalty from its closest neighbor. Canada has proven it can prosper without U.S. intermediation, and that is the most dangerous precedent. If Canada can do it, why not Mexico? Why not Europe? Why not every ally searching for independence from America's shadow? The dominoes are already falling. The thread is fraying. Each contract replaced, each alliance rebuilt, and when it finally breaks, America will lose more than trade. It will lose the very foundation of its global leadership. The question is no longer if it happens. The question is how close we already are to the edge.
Welcome back. Canada is looking to boost trade with other North American trading partners, namely Mexico, as both countries try to work out a trade agreement with the volatile U.S. under President Trump.
We have always said that we will apply tariffs where they had the maximum impact in the United States and a minimum impact in Canada.
In Mexico City, a closed-door meeting between senior Canadian and Mexican officials is underway. On the surface, it looks like a routine trade discussion, but behind those closed doors lies a bold strategy to forge a tighter alliance in order to counter Washington's unpredictable tariff strikes. Canada now sees Mexico not just as a trade partner, but as a strategic lever, a bargaining chip to force the United States back to the negotiating table. Within the North American trade bloc, USMCA/CUSMA, Mexico is more than just a participant. It is a back door into the U.S. market.
Two Canadian ministers traveled to Mexico City to meet with the president that got that extension and is yet to retaliate against Trump.
Canada's core industries, mining, energy, banking, and tourism, can connect directly with Mexico, creating supply chains that loop around the United States. If Washington erects tariff walls, Ottawa can still rely on bilateral agreements with Mexico to keep goods and services flowing, without depending entirely on U.S. goodwill.
Let's be clear. Canada does not dump lumber into the United States. And we will continue to make the case that these current and proposed duties are unjustified.
Recently, Mexico received a 90-day reprieve before new U.S. tariffs take effect. Canada did not. This creates a strategic opening. Mexico is currently in a position where Washington is applying less pressure. By strengthening ties now, Canada can tap into Mexico's advantage, slipping into negotiation channels that the U.S. still keeps open, and break the isolation Washington has been trying to impose.
Canada has chosen a direct, confrontational approach, strong pushback, retaliatory tariffs, and public opposition to Washington's trade policies. Mexico, on the other hand, has chosen to keep quiet and concede on certain demands, such as tightening border security, to avoid open conflict.
So you're saying that Canada's not respecting that agreement, that trade agreement?
Well, I think they'd be the first ones to admit that. I mean, it's not respecting.
If managed skillfully, these two approaches could form a diplomatic pincer. Canada plays the hardliner, Mexico plays the conciliator, forcing the U.S. to recalibrate its stance to avoid a complete fracture in the North American bloc. Protecting North American supply chains, keeping trilateral trade flowing even under new U.S. tariffs. Boosting cross-investment, encouraging Mexico to invest in Canada, particularly in food processing, energy, and banking. Adding political pressure on Washington. Expanding influence, using Mexico as a bridge into South American markets, helping Canada diversify exports and reduce dependence on the U.S. This strategy carries serious risks. If Washington realizes Canada is using Mexico as a workaround to bypass tariffs or gain leverage, the backlash could be severe. Heavier tariffs, stricter measures in sensitive areas like energy, or tighter border controls. Moreover, Mexico has its own priorities and will not hesitate to adjust its position if an alliance with Canada threatens its own standing with the U.S. The meeting in Mexico City may last only a few days, but its significance goes far beyond a routine diplomatic trip. It signals that Canada is willing to play a high-stakes game, turning Mexico into a strategic lever to break U.S. dominance. In this power play, Ottawa is betting on its ability to coordinate two very different diplomatic styles, Canada's blunt directness and Mexico's subtle flexibility, to force Washington to rethink its moves. If the gamble pays off, it could mark a major shift in the balance of North American trade. But if it fails, Canada could bear the full weight of U.S. retaliation, a price that may far exceed anything Ottawa originally calculated.
Consumer boycotts are the reason that President Trump and some of his team have referred to Canada as being mean and nasty to deal with.
Ontario's premier says Canada needs to match President Donald Trump's tariffs dollar for dollar.
Donald Trump doesn't usually hold back. But this time, his words triggered something deeper than political drama. Standing before a crowd of business leaders in Washington, his hand-picked ambassador to Canada explained why Trump sees Canadians as mean and nasty to deal with. Not because of military threats or major trade violations, but because Canadians are quietly boycotting U.S. travel and refusing to buy American alcohol. On the surface, it sounded like a throwaway insult, but what it revealed was something far more telling: that the Canadian public's grassroots reaction, one without protests or megaphones, was working. It began with tariffs. Steel, lumber, aluminum, sectors deeply tied to Canadian jobs, were suddenly slapped with high U.S. duties in early 2025. Then came the rhetoric. Trump's remarks about Canada taking advantage of America sparked anger and confusion. Instead of shouting back, Canadians changed their habits. By July 2025, according to data from international travel platforms like Hopper and Expedia, flights from Canada to the U.S. dropped by over 26%. Alberta and British Columbia led the decline. Meanwhile, Canadian liquor boards from Ontario to Quebec reported a dramatic drop in American alcohol sales. In some cases, shelves were restocked entirely with domestic or European brands. At the same time, retail movements like Buy Canadian surged. Independent shops across Ottawa, Montreal, and Vancouver said their sales of Canadian-made goods had doubled compared to the same period last year. What started as a reaction became a movement, and it got Washington's attention.
Like, obviously, Canadians are outraged. I say Canadians, stick with it, like, hold the line.
BC Premier David Eby says Hoekstra's remarks show Canada's efforts to stand up to Trump are, quote, having an impact.
If Trump thought provinces would buckle under pressure, he misread the room. British Columbia Premier David Eby publicly challenged the tone coming out of Washington. He didn't just defend the boycott, he said it was proof that Canadians were finally being heard. In Ontario, Premier Doug Ford took a different but equally firm approach. Instead of backing down, he called on Ottawa to respond with equal tariffs, dollar for dollar. In his words, showing weakness would only invite more pressure. Across the political spectrum, premiers aligned on one message: Canadians have the right to protect their economy and sovereignty, even if that means spending differently.
We should note
to our friends and neighbors in Canada, the Granite State sends you our greetings and says we miss you.
The ambassador's comments may have sparked outrage, but not everyone in the U.S. echoed that tone. Just days later, a bipartisan group of U.S. senators visited Ottawa. Unlike the ambassador, they didn't criticize Canadians. They expressed concern. New Hampshire's Maggie Hassan and Nevada's Catherine Cortez Masto noted how their states were already feeling the pain. Canadian tourism was down, shopping districts were quieter, and hospitality jobs were at risk. In Nevada alone, Canadians usually account for 30% of international visitors. That number has sharply declined this summer, and with it, millions in revenue. What Canadians chose to do with their vacation dollars was no longer a small matter. It was reshaping cross-border economics.
Many in Ottawa say Trump's rhetoric just strengthens their resolve to buy Canadian and boycott travel down south.
Some might say skipping a trip or switching a brand is too small to matter. But collectively, these choices created pressure, the kind that even Trump's administration couldn't ignore. This wasn't about emotion, it was about agency. Canadians didn't need to shout, their wallets spoke for them. And if those choices made them seem mean and nasty, then perhaps that label was never really an insult, but a sign of strength.
I think Trump is Trump, and we listen to him, and then we just let one thing, what he says, go through one ear and out the other.
In the end, this moment isn't about diplomatic language, it's about posture. Trump may dominate headlines, but Canada, quietly and collectively, is demonstrating resolve. Not through threats, not through deals,
but through everyday decisions made by people, provinces, and premiers to stand their ground, protect what's theirs, and define what kind of neighbor they choose to be. Because if mean and nasty means refusing to bow under pressure, then Canada is wearing it well.